Donald Trump and Keir Starmer took questions from the world's press at the Prime Minister's stately home. But which man will leave happier at the end of Donald Trump's 2-day state visit to the UK? We'll discuss on this episode of the BBC's daily news podcast, Newscast.
Newscast.
Newscast from the BBC.
Hello, it's Adam in the Newscast studio.
Hello, it's Alex in the studio.
Hi, it's Faisal in the Newscast studio.
And it is Chris at Chequers.
Chris, you look like you're, I don't know, like an Agatha Christie, like country house murder drama, like with the sun poking through the trees.
It's quite the backdrop, this, isn't it? So we're in the Chiltern Hills in Buckinghamshire. The obligatory sort of description attached to this building is that it is the Prime Minister's country retreat, because it is and has been for the various Prime Ministers of the last century and a bit. And you sort of feel the history here. You feel the, Churchill and Thatcher and Clinton and Nixon and so many people who have passed through this building, been spent time here either as a Prime Minister or visited here as a visiting dignitary. And quite the kind of political backdrop following the more kind of regal stuff yesterday for this state visit.
And Faisal, kind of like the real pounds and pence stuff and dollars was this tech deal and all the associated business deals that came with it. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But Alex, it's been interesting watching the last couple of days of Trump's state visit, and he's on his way across the Atlantic now on Thursday night. This has been made for television, this whole thing, hasn't it?
Yeah. Well, it's like he said, even when he was on his way over here, what are you going to get out of this? Well, you're going to get good pictures. And that's exactly what it's been about. And kind of, obviously, because from a US perspective, they want to see Donald Trump on that stage and platform being surrounded by the pomp and pageantry. He wants those images to be broadcast out as well. But it's been sort of doubly so because a lot of it's been behind closed doors or closed gates of, kind of Windsor, because it's been away from the public because of all the security concerns. So even more so, it's just been like this televisual spectacle, which is exactly what Donald Trump wanted.
And Chris, the real moment for jeopardy for the Prime Minister, everyone agreed, was this news conference he did with Donald Trump on Thursday afternoon for about 45 minutes. And the reason it was jeopardous, if that's a word, is because Trump is really unpredictable. And if he wants to give a fellow world leader the hairdryer treatment, he does. But actually, Starmer escaped kind of, superficially unscathed.
Yeah, he did, really. The Prime Minister seems to have managed to tame Donald Trump in public to the point where the kind of erratic outbursts that we're so used to from him, that are a kind of central characteristic, really, of his sort of political style, he doesn't seem to do in the company of Keir Starmer. Now, speaking to people in Downing Street tonight, they are delighted with how the last couple of days has gone, and they are relieved. You can hear the relief because they knew of the jeopardy, and just because the last encounter with Donald Trump may have passed off okay doesn't mean the next one will. But I think they're getting to the point now where they have developed this relationship, the two administrations and the two men, where it's normalising a little bit, and perhaps they don't have to give as much headspace, as much bandwidth to catastrophizing about how a particular thing might go, because there does seem to be that mutual respect. And the thing that struck me, Adam, in the room during the press conference is not that they wildly agree on everything. They clearly don't. But the president was willing to channel his disagreements almost past the Prime Minister rather than at him. And we know his capacity to target criticisms at people, even including people in the same room as him. The kind of normal rules of diplomacy in public often don't apply. But the arguably unpredictable thing about this unpredictable president today was that he followed the normal conventions of diplomacy, really, and whilst disagreeing on topics, did so with a certain gentleness, really.
And Alex, there was a classic example of that when right at the end, the name Peter Mandelson came up in one of the questions, and actually Donald Trump just didn't go there. I mean, he did a bit of misinformation by saying, I don't know him, when actually he clearly did, but he didn't
and
cause
has
a problem.
commented on his accent before.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think all the way through the press conference, there were a couple of things that people were watching out for, which are the points of policy disagreement that we know exist between the US and the UK. But sitting over it all was the shadow of what has so recently happened with Peter Mandelson, his sacking because of his connections to Jeffrey Epstein. it was sort of in the background and no one mentioned it until Beth Rigby from Sky in the very last question said, let me address the elephant in the room and put this question. And you're completely right. Donald Trump didn't go for it. He just said, I don't know him, even though he does, and passed it on to Keir Starmer. And Keir Starmer gave a very terse and short answer about his account of why he decided to sack Peter Mandelson when he did. Obviously, I think the counter to that is perhaps not just because Donald Trump was trying to be particularly diplomatic to Keir Starmer, although that may have been the case, but also because Donald Trump doesn't want to talk about Jeffrey Epstein
he's
either.
defending himself.
Yeah, that just wasn't a subject that either of them wanted to go anywhere near. And there was a bit of I suppose it was a bit of a gift to them compared to what might have been that it did only come up once during the course of the whole visit in that way.
But nevertheless, as Alex was saying, we managed to tease out some of the policy differences between them. And Chris, you did that straight away. The first question where you asked about the recognition of a Palestinian state, which the UK government is about to do imminently, and which the US government really does not agree with, and which we saw playing out in real time today.
We absolutely agree on the need for peace and a roadmap because the situation in Gaza is intolerable. The hostages have been held for a very, very long time, and they must be freed. And we need aid to get into Gaza at speed. And so it's within that context of a plan for peace, which we're working hard on, which not only did we discuss this morning, but our two teams have been working together on, that the question of recognition needs to be seen.
We have to have the hostages back immediately. That's what the people of Israel want. They want them back. And we want the fighting to stop, and it's going to stop. But a lot of bad things. Hamas said that they're going to put the hostages up as bait. They're going to put the hostages in front of any attack. And that's pretty brutal. We haven't heard that one in a long time. So we have to remember that. So I have a disagreement with the Prime Minister on that score.
So, yeah, Chris, what was your take about that little back and forth there on recognition of a Palestinian state?
So the president happy to say explicitly that he disagreed with the Prime Minister on this issue, albeit choosing to say that explicitly as he did right at the end of quite of a long answer. So even that dialed down, if you like, that sense of the two men being on a different page on the issue. They acknowledged they'd talked about it in private. And let's be clear, on that issue of the recognition of a Palestinian state, the two administrations are a million miles apart. The White House thinks it's a terrible idea, and the Prime Minister thinks it's a decent idea. And in the next couple of days, once the president is, from the Prime Minister's perspective, safely back on the other side of the Atlantic, that's what's going to happen. The UK, alongside others, is going to recognise a Palestinian state, and that'll be a very big generational moment in terms of British foreign policy. So they clearly talked about it. I mean, the disagreement is real and is profound on that specific. I think both men were keen to emphasise, and there is some truth in, that the desired outcome that they each share is exactly that, is shared, trying to work towards, and obviously it's a very big ambition, but work towards a solution where Israel feels safe in its own geopolitical neighbourhood, and there is the scope in time potentially for a Palestinian state. The Prime Minister, I noticed, entirely ducked the question I asked him about the extent to which he is accounting for domestic political concerns on his own side. Plenty in the Labour movement very, very keen to see him do it, and indeed ducked the extent to which doing it now actually makes any difference given the geopolitical reality on the ground.
So, Faisal, Donald Trump was flattered with skydiving and the Red Arrows and so many marching bands. I didn't know. People were saying the British Army was really small by historic standards. It looks quite big in the musical department. But so they flattered him in that way, and then they flattered him in the other way by doing loads of deals. Yeah. Just explain to us where we are on like the deal totalizer at the end of this week.
So there's the deals country to country. And in particular, there was the moment where they did the big signing and they showed the deal. I think in truth, that deal is rather thin, non-legally binding, but a statement of intent that the various research institutes and standards institutes for these industries of the future, primarily artificial intelligence, but also on nuclear technology and quantum computing, which is, I mean, let's not go.
We don't
there.
have a long enough podcast.
We don't,
but it's
basically
going to matter a lot. In the
computers
future.
so powerful they have to be put in a fridge at minus 170 degrees but they don't even obey normal law of physics. We'll just leave it there.
Yeah.
Amazing, super powered computers that we can't even contemplate.
But what I love though is that because of this tech deal, you've got quantum computing on one side, and then you look at it in black and white, and it's an invitation for Liz Kendall, the tech secretary, to go to Washington every 6 months for a meeting.
Yeah, I think it's coordination, it's goodwill, and it's a kind of wrapper around the substance. And I think this is substantive, which was this series of deals, mainly by the technology companies in these frontier science, frontier economy sectors, but also with some other deals as well, which they sort of added all up. And they put a jobs number. I'm pretty skeptical. I mean, this is like a perennial of these sorts of things. I'm pretty skeptical about the jobs numbers, not because I think it's impossible, but like you just can't put a number on it. It could actually be much higher, the sorts of jobs that you could create. I think we can go into some of the detail of what this is, and in particular what it means in the tech sector. But I think the big picture is this. If you are the government that's been in office for a year, it's been a turbulent year, both politically and economically, and you think, well, what was our offer? What were we saying to the country? We were saying, well, firstly, we're stable. We've had 10 years of like Brexit and post-Brexit madness and 4 prime ministers and 5 chancellors and all that sort of stuff in a couple of years. And we're stable, so let's talk to the world's business and say, we're stable now, come and invest in us. And we're going to do a series of other things, planning. They have tweaked the sorts of regulatory environment for this sort of tech to make it more amenable. They're not regulating AI like the European Union is. Talk to these people, set a kind of fertile bedding for their investments, and yes, it will come. And it will come at a time when the British state doesn't have billions and billions and billions to do these sorts of investments themselves. So you're looking for proof points of what was always going to take a few months or years to come through. It doesn't get much better than pretty much 4 of the top 5 or 6 tech companies in the world, including 3 of the triple trillionaire companies. There's only 4. 3 of them were involved in multi-billion investments in the UK. Saying that, putting in the investments, but then also the most astonishing quotes, actually, I have to say, went much further than you normally get around a sprinkling of investment, about how excited they were about investing in the UK. I'm willing to say that very, very publicly and repeatedly.
But I suppose, Alex, the political risk for Keir Starmer here is that not many people are marching through the streets going, what do we want? Loads of NVIDIA chips and the promise of some more meetings.
Are you sure about that?
I mean, maybe
quantum computing now.
I want these chips. I was holding one.
It's like, these are all good things, but they're like good things in the future, and it doesn't do anything for like your gas bill in December.
And doesn't that speak to the key problem that is facing this Labour government at the moment? They would argue, and ministers will repeatedly tell you, that they are doing lots of good things, whether that is this sort of attracting tech investment for the future, whether it is creating the conditions that they hope is going to lead to the economic growth that they are so desperate to get, whether it's breakfast clubs and schools. I mean, they always give you this list of all the things that they point to as their successes in their first year. But the question for them is, A, what does it add up to? And B, is anyone noticing? And I think there is a real recognition in government and on the Labour benches that whether you blame the communications or the messaging or whatever it is, people aren't necessarily feeling the benefits, if you want to see them as that, of some of these measures that the government is doing. And that is absolutely Keir Starmer's biggest problem right now. When you take away all the turmoil about, resignations and sackings, that's the sort of really fundamental issue that's facing the Labour Party. And I'm not, there is recognition of that almost at every level. And that's why we've seen these kind of shake-ups inside Downing Street and shake-ups of the cabinet and shake-ups of everything else. Because, is this making a difference to people, or are people even recognising what they're up to?
But I think it's an answer to a different question. Now, if you were to sort of say, how do we just make everyone feel better? I mean, it's true, consumer confidence has still not recovered. You can do this and set the conditions for kind of long-term growth that may start to show up in 2 or 3 years' time. If you wanted to make everyone feel better, I don't know, what would you do? You'd write checks for people, you instigate kind of a scheme to get their bills down and stuff.
Well,
but I think they're trying to do something else. And I think this is why I found the comments of an array, and it was one person, it was the array of these sorts of US economic leaders saying not just we're investing in Britain, we think Britain's a great place, but also, as one of them said to me, the Nvidia chief Jensen Huang, he said a number of things to me, but one of the things he said was, I just don't get why you guys are so sort of down. Come on. Like, he had this sort of, it was like proper kind of all-American like enthusiasm. He goes, but you need to be more optimistic about the country. And I'm very struck, and this is why it's quite helpful to have this group here, because I, in economics, know there's not like, I was struck how despondent the mood is in Westminster. And it's not like there's people saying there's a boom economically, but certainly there are pockets of optimism that don't feed through to Westminster, and there may be a bit of a mismatch. And it may be that some of these interviews may have just made people realise actually there are things to be optimistic about.
Well, and Chris, could you actually see that playing out in Chequers today, where coming through one door you had the MAGA people, all very buoyant, doing things in their Trumpy way, with a load of tech trillionaires in their wake, and then on the other side you have like the Brits, and like
shuffling in, looking at their toes.
Does it actually play out like that?
A little bit. By the way, the other thing we could just see whilst I was listening to the conversation there was a huge bird of prey flying over Chequers.
Metaphor alert.
It's a kite.
We were thinking, is it a buzzard or is it a kite? Anyway, I'll leave sort of ornithology. Is that the right word?
Yes.
To others. On that optimism thing, I think, or lack of it, Faisal, is fascinating. In fact, Jeremy Hunt, the former Chancellor, has written a book broadly along these lines, that sort of sense that, have we managed to get ourselves into a collective national funk about plenty of things that many will acknowledge are perhaps not where plenty would want them to be, but at the same time, the sort of self-fulfilling prophecy, potentially, of being seen to be in a sort of psychological doom loop. And certainly when I speak to people in government around, a lot of these, the blizzard of numbers, and, I think, Faisal, you're right to have a certain scepticism about the sort of blizzard of numbers around jobs and all the rest of it. But they try to make an argument that says, look, they are doing what they can to create a backdrop where you can see these announcements from Microsoft and Nvidia and others. And certainly politically, they make the case, as you would if you were them, that after a really bumpy couple of weeks that the Prime Minister's had, that this is the stuff that sort of seeds the potential for longer term growth. But it's so interesting, that wider conversation, particularly, as you say, Faisal, from chief executives who might look in on a sort of Westminster-based gloom fest in terms of the conversation, and where that leaves people's impressions of the country, really.
But what is interesting about all of this is it does sort of speak to Keir Starmer's approach from the beginning. I think he has been pretty open about the fact he doesn't think that there's sort of one thing that's going to fix everything, and that he's going to do that, and he's telling people it's all going to be solved. He's taken this sort of incremental approach to lots of different areas in the hope eventually that some of this stuff starts to get better. The big problem for him is, will it? Will this stuff actually work in time, whether it's on small boats or whether it's on the economy, whether it's on growth, whatever it might be. And the second one is, have people got the patience to wait? Do people really believe that what he's doing is going to pay off for them? And is he good enough at convincing them to do it? And I think that's where a lot of his own critics, even his own party, would question.
Chris, I know you've got to go, but can I just get a word from you on the international picture? I mean, obviously, it's all the international picture because we're talking about a US state visit. But two interesting bits in the news conference. One, when Donald Trump says he wants to get Bagram Air Base in Afghanistan back for the Americans because it's a good place to bomb China from. Okay, let's park that for now. But second of all, just on the situation with Ukraine and Russia, the Trump pendulum seems to be swinging away from Putin again.
It does, yeah. His language pretty spiky, wasn't it, about Vladimir Putin, in that sense that he's been let down by the Russian leader. He wasn't willing to suggest that the whole business of their meeting in Alaska, where Russia's president was feted, with a red carpet, to the horror, to the disgust of plenty, was a bad idea. I think he believes, the president, that, you've got to meet, and that's a important path towards some sort of settlement. But clearly an acknowledgement from him that so far it's not been working, that he feels that he's been let down. In a broader answer, when he was talking about the conflict in Ukraine and indeed in the Middle East, he sort of acknowledged that in attempting to bring about peace in various conflicts, sometimes it was more complicated than perhaps he had acknowledged. Sometimes things took longer than he'd acknowledged. You'll recall that he talked about being able to resolve the whole thing in a day, which clearly has not happened. But striking that he would publicly and repeatedly suggest that President Putin was letting him down. The question that we didn't really get an answer to, or the thought, if you like, that was left hanging is, so what's the next move then? What is he willing to do next in, I guess, bluntly turning the screws on Russia to the point where you might see some sort of climb down? He talked about it in the context of the oil price, for instance, but what levers might he be willing to pull? And yes, that little business or, potentially significant business of the Bagram Air Base was more classic Donald Trump, wasn't it? If we had a more sort of diplomatic Donald Trump today, that was a more classic Donald Trump where out of nowhere, because nobody had asked him about anything remotely close to that particular idea, I think he billed it as breaking news from memory.
Did our job for us.
So well, yeah, exactly. He's almost writing those straps that appear at the bottom of the screen on various news channels, saying that was something they were looking to do. Extraordinary. And being explicit about why, because it was, an hour's flight away from China's nuclear facilities. So, that capacity to just drop in something that is, in all sorts of directions, diplomatically and geopolitically fascinating. And then you begin to wonder, is this something that has been in the works for a while and that he is publicly talking about? Or is he almost trying to announce it into existence, seeding this idea publicly in the hope that somehow it's something that they can bring about? So, a couple of diplomatic and international things for me to mop up on. Here's the local one, though. The last bus out of Chequers is about to go.
Right,
So
go and get your correct change, please. Chris, I'll see you later.
I will.
And you know
Cheers,
what?
guys. See ya.
Bye-bye. And we're going to replace Chris with King Charles. No, he's not here on Newscast. That would be quite a scoop. But this is a clip from the state banquet on Wednesday night when both Trump and the King did their remarks, and the King made quite a pointed reference to basically Ukraine.
In 2 world wars, we fought together to defeat the forces of tyranny. Today, as tyranny once again threatens Europe, we and our allies stand together in support of Ukraine to deter aggression and secure peace.
When you go off and do any questions on Friday night, I always think the audience there is a real litmus test of whether these big events and all this stuff like tech deals and, the gap on recognising Palestine, whether that cuts through to actual voters. In your experience, do these big set-piece things translate into loads of questions?
Typically yes, because they sort of dominate the news coverage for 2 or 3 days, and most of the people that will come along to any questions, not all of them, but most of them will be pretty tuned into what's been in the news. I have to say Donald Trump always dominates the questions on any questions. People are just have endless questions about not just Donald Trump, but what that relationship means for the UK. I think probably maybe the details of, we get a lot on AI broadly, but maybe like the details of a tech deal is something that won't resonate as much as what the sort of broader consequences of Donald Trump and the state visit more broadly. But our audience is clued up and switched on, and they want to know about this kind of stuff. I
think an interesting thing is when you've got a government trying to achieve 2 things at the same time that's contradictory, how they balance that. And I think that maybe is that what we saw? So we saw him trying to stay in with Donald Trump, but while sticking to the line on Gaza, and he seemed to pull that off.
Oh, yeah. So he said, I'm in favour of Palestinian state, but Hamas cannot be part of that because they're terrorists and responsible for October the 7th, which is, a compromised position.
So that means that's it. And that is why I think, say, in trade, being able to do the deals he's done with America whilst getting a closer deal with the European Union, which is what we were told was impossible under the previous government, that is kind of worth writing home about. You've done something that is tricky diplomatically, and you've pulled it off, and you've done 2 things at the same time. So I think that's where, you have to choose. But then they've shown, if you pick the right middle ground, you can just about get through it.
That was always the claim when Keir Starmer was quite still early in office, that he'd have to make a pivotal decision between facing towards the US or the EU.
Yeah.
And obviously what he has managed to negotiate is the tariff reduction deal with the US and improved relationships with the EU. So, I mean, he's navigated the tightrope on that kind of stuff pretty carefully. And obviously, the broad assessment is that when it comes to this more foreign-facing area, Keir Starmer has done better, perhaps, than he has done on some of the direct domestic issues. I think today was another kind of balancing act of the wobbly tightrope of the Donald Trump interaction.
Faisal, very quickly, you were completely buzzing when we recorded Newscast on Wednesday, available to download now on BBC Sounds, because you'd just been speaking to Jensen Huang, the boss of NVIDIA, the massive multi-trillion-dollar chip company. And you promised me he had some good advice for all of us about how to survive in the future.
Ooh.
What is it?
Yes. So the reason why it's important is that they control the chips that basically control AI. Everyone wants to buy them. They're all queuing up. And he can walk in to see Donald Trump. He can walk in to see Xi Jinping. So when I spoke to him, I did ask him, let us know what jobs are going to survive and what should you study or what should your kids study? And
well, let's hear what he said.
Yeah.
Every job has a lot of tasks. Many of those tasks will be eliminated and some new tasks will come about. And with respect to jobs, you're not likely to lose your job to AI. You're likely to lose your job to someone who uses AI.
So
I'm still not sure what job I should be retraining for as a result of that.
I mean, there was a long discussion about whether the trades are the future. He still thinks maths and science is the way to go if you're that way kind of inclined in terms of that's how your brain functions. But I think the bottom line is he said that it won't replace jobs, but it will replace tasks. And it'll become your buddy. AI will become your buddy. But it won't take. But I feel like some of these phrases and some of these reassurances are starting to wear a bit thin. A number of people, and they may well write in, are starting to see at the graduate level.
Write in.
Email
we're talking about
email in.
Exactly. Your quill out.
Get ChatGPT to text us in.
Sure, the price
but I think you'll see, and the serious point is they're seeing it in the law, in creative industries, in accountancy. You're starting to see some of the jobs that would have ordinarily gone to, say, graduates starting to be automated. So that
I thought that was meant to be an optimistic bit.
No.
Well, no, it's basically the message is learn to use AI because AI won't take your job, but somebody who's good at using AI better than you might take your job.
And do you know how he uses AI? He gets every single different model, and then he asks the same question, and then he gets them to fight and critique each other. Then he comes out with the best answer. So there you go.
Basically like what we've just done in old school tonight. Actually, you know, joke about writing in. We actually are getting people to write in, but in a modern way.
Sniffy and sneering, and then he just goes back on it.
It's just a cheap gag. Basically, we're doing this. It's called a census. It's not really a census because it's very unscientific, but it's basically a survey of people who watch and listen to Newscast, and we're calling it the census.
I knew that.
And basically, you can scan a QR code or go to a link, and you can answer a series of short questions about how you consume Newscast and where you listen to it, when you listen to it, how you listen to it, what your ideal length of Newscast is, and whether you want more stories, fewer stories, what sort of people you want to hear from. Do you want to hear celebrities? Or do you want to hear non-celebrities like me? And so that's what we're doing. Thousands and thousands of people have done it already.
That's so impressive.
Yeah.
It's such a good idea as well.
Exactly, because it doesn't require writing in with any stamps or anything.
So you can do this electronically.
It is an electronic census.
Excellent work.
And we love hearing from newscasters. And it's a great way to just let us know what you like or what you don't like. And then we can trim the podcast accordingly. Right, Faisal, thank you.
Great to be here.
Alex, thanks to you too.
Pleasure as ever.
And thanks to Chris, who hopefully is on the last bus from Chequers. Bye-bye.